I'm joined here now with instructor and author Guy Windsor. Now, for our viewers who aren't aware, could you give us your background and how you got started with swordsmanship and medieval and Renaissance martial arts?
Basically, my parents were taking weapons off me when I was very little. So I've always been into weapons and martial arts and things like that. And I was doing sport fencing in the late 80s. And then when I got to university, I met some people who were similarly frustrated with sport fencing. It's a bit too artificial, it's a bit too much of a sport for us. We wanted to do real sword fighting, as whatever that may be. And so we discovered these books, historical sources that actually explain how to use a sword. So, for example, a book from the early 17th century explaining how to fence with a rapier. Or later on, we found a manuscript from the early 15th century explaining knightly combat with like daggers and long swords and horses and spears and things. So that sort of became in the 90s. I got really into that, and I somehow managed to finish my degree and get a job and all that sort of thing. But really the focus of my emotional life was sword practice on Wednesday nights and most weekends. And then in 2000 I decided to teach historical swordsmanship for a living, and in 2001 I moved to Helsinki and opened the School of European Swordsmanship, which is still running there today.
Yes, I was reading your bio and it does seem very interesting how you got started in all of this. And you've released books in the past, but with your newest book, The Windsor Method, what does this book focus on?
Most training, most in any art, most training tends to be done alone. So, for example, most professional musicians, even if they play in an orchestra, they show up to work and practice in the orchestra, but they also have to do their own practice at home. Because when you're on your own, you can really focus on specifically what exactly you personally need to work on. And particularly during the pandemic, many of my sword people were stuck at home and had no option but to train on their own. And I already had an online course on how to train alone, and that's fine for like specific exercises. And if you like rapiers, do this, and if you like long swords, do that. But there's a mental approach to it, or a sort of theoretical approach to it, that I felt really, you can't really teach that over a series of videos. It's much better in a book. And so I wrote the book, which is basically, I can summarize it for you in 2 sentences. Find out what works for you and then do that, right? And that's two separate things. And finding out what works for you is actually harder than it sounds, because you see someone doing something and you go, oh, I want to do that. And you ask them how they learned how to do it, and they tell you, and you try it and it completely doesn't work because you have a different body, you have a different mind, you have a different background, you're just a different person. So figuring out what approach works for you is part of it. And then figuring out how you're actually going to act on, having found out what works for you, how you're actually going to actually do it. So, I mean, for example, you may find that you have short hamstrings. Great. Okay. So you found out you've got this weakness in your, or this thing is stopping you from doing what you want to do. So how do you make your hamstrings not go? Well, you have these various stretching routines. Well, how do you figure out which of those stretching routines is right for you? And then how often should you do it? How do you work that out? And when do you know that you're done? And so basically what the book is about is figuring out what works for you and then how you do that.
So would you say that this book is best for beginners who are just starting to get into this?
I deliberately wrote it so it should be useful for literally anybody. So even if you're not into swords, it should still be useful, because if you're, if let's say you're a runner or you play football or you're a musician, or basically if you're a person who is at all interested in how your body works, and if you're at all interested in developing skill in any area, one student of mine is a data scientist, and she's like, oh my God, this is how I should do data science. It's like, I don't know anything about data science. But no, it's because it's the thing is, it's the approach. And that approach, yeah, most of my experience in this sort of thing comes from historical swordsmanship, but the approach of how do you get better at a thing you're trying to do, that actually works for pretty much anything.
So if anyone is looking to purchase your newest book or any of your other works, where is the best place to go?
They can get them anywhere that books are sold. Honestly, get them from the library. If you ask the library for it, they can get it in for you. If that doesn't work, your local bookshop can order it in. And if you prefer to shop online, you can, of course, also do that. And if you want to find like the books page, which has like links to the various online shops, if you go to guywindsor.net/solo, that'll take you straight to that page.
Thank you so much for your time today, Guy.